and welcome to the Phillipians, the commentary podcast. I'm Sahana, and today we have two guests. And you guys can introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Min Beharry. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a senior, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-heads of Phillips Academy Neurodivergent Association.
Hi, my name is Jaylen Daley. I am an upper this year, and I am a board member of the PANDA Association. Yeah.
And then before we begin, we just wanted to say that all of our opinions and views are our opinions, and they do not reflect the Phillipian board or general school as a whole. These are our views and our opinions.
We're spilling tea tonight.
All right, so one of the first things that I just wanted to start with is overall, what do you think about the awareness of neurodevelopmental disorders at PA in general?
Yeah, so it really depends on who you're talking to. I think that there's a big, or not big discrepancy, but there's differences when it comes to students and teachers that you interact with. But I can say that for a lot of students who are neurotypical and trying to engage with neurodivergent issues, sometimes people fall into the trap of overrepresenting or like somebody else and their issues and their experiences, and it can come off as supporting ableist notions. And so sometimes it can be really damaging, but other times people may just not know a whole lot about neurodiversity and what it means to have ADHD, what it means to be autistic, what it means to have OCD, this, that, and the third, and more general situations. I know for teachers, especially for students who are neurodivergent, communication can be very difficult because there's a higher expectation for a lot more things that we're here because of the fact that we're here. But overall, it's not so bad, and our board is mainly, our club is mainly just to bring more awareness and to bring more clarity to neurotypical people on campus, students and teachers, about our experiences.
The thing with a school like Andover, where we're so consistently told, this place is a hard place to be, the experience of, this is a little harder for me than it seems to be for everyone else, can be very easily, misconstrued. And there is a natural range of, the experience you'll have at a place like Andover, but then there's also, a point where it becomes a clinical consideration. And the understanding very often that people seem to have is more superficial than recognizing things like ADHD as an actual disorder rather than a set of experiences.
Right.
Do you think that Andover and what you experience here is what you experience at home, wherever that might be in the world in general?
It depends academically, it depends familially, it depends just socially. There's a lot of ways that Andover is a bubble overall in so many different aspects of life, and I think that neurodiversity really isn't any different. I mean, I'm getting an eval through this school because I'm not sure if I'd have the same access to resources. I'm not sure if I'd be able to convince my family if it weren't for the doctors, if it weren't for the systems that are here and what the school has access to. But overall at home, it also changes with the education because so many more students, there's a different standard for neurodivergent people. There's a different standard for, there's a different standard for normal people, and there's a different standard for gifted people, quote unquote gifted people, which are very often neurodivergent as well. There's a different standard just intersectionally as well. So I'm not saying a whole lot in particular on how, but yes, for sure.
I mean, my mother is adamant that I would not have gotten diagnosed with autism if I had not been at Andover. And to some degree that's true because I did get my evaluation covered by financial aid, which I'm very grateful for.
I will too.
But I think the issues that come up that required my diagnosis would have happened anywhere. To be neurodivergent is a struggle in any context. It's just the way that they appear in Andover's context will just look different than they would elsewhere. But the point of a neurodevelopmental disability is that it is disabling regardless.
Right. Sort of connecting that to what I was trying to say, I feel also one thing one of my family members said before I came here was like, I was trying to explain to them my issues having to do with ADHD, and they were like, well, I mean, we'll look into it, but it would be surprising if you got into Andover with an ADHD, and so we'll see what you can do, but like, yeah. And so I feel like being here and being at home, there's very different standards for how we function and how we like live our lives, how we work, but like, with being at Andover and being at home, it's very different standards. It's usually the standards that set us apart, at least for me.
And sentiments like you wouldn't be able to get into Andover with ADHD are very harmful for people who experience things like ADHD because getting into Andover is not indicative of a complete set of abilities. Certain symptoms come up more often in contexts that are not necessarily involved with things like just completing your Andover application.
Right.
And like Andover is a small window of life that does not encompass every single experience of having neurodiversity.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that you guys talked a lot about standards, and that make me think about, are there any, or I'm sure there are, but like, what do you think are like the major misconceptions about being neurodivergent? Why they are completely not true in some cases?
The first thing to recognize is that neurodiversity is not, there's no consistent experience of being neurodivergent, as in there's no single symptom that exists among all people who identify as neurodivergent. So every experience is going to be individual to the person who chooses to identify as such. But
Yeah. I mean, I can pick it up if you want to think about it. Yeah. But also to that point, a lot of times people will not only like say that there's like, or like think that there's a consistency between a lot of diversities, but I mean, of course, the term is neurodiversity for a reason. It's literally diverse experiences. And one ways that people can misconstrue it is that they think of a neurodivergent person as an amalgamation of their symptoms, like everything, like if they have a disorder, it has to be extreme. Which sort of leads into another thing. A lot of people just think that neurodiversity, and I think this is in Andover and outside Andover as well, just in general, neurodiversity is often thought of as like however anybody else perceives it. It's not just about like a person and how they interact with you. A lot of neurodivergence has to do with how the person actually is, how the person functions. It's very internal, and it really affects just how we live. And so when we talk about like our issues in terms of our work, in terms of our like identities, in terms of this, that, and the fourth, we don't get a whole lot of empathy because people just think that we might be able to like turn off some switches at the same time. So not everything has to be extreme, and not everything is about a neurotypical person's experiences with a neurodivergent person.
Also, a lot of neurodivergent people have. There's an expectation, specifically for a lot of autistic and people with ADHD, of being stupid.
Yeah.
And of not being capable of the same potential as a neurotypical person. And that's just not true. These conditions are not reflective of intellect or anything of the sort. They're just context to the way that a person behaves and experiences the world.
Right. And like, yeah, I'll leave it at that, but yeah.
You can add on if you want to.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking is just like, I guess, but just because it's like harder for a neurodivergent person doesn't, like for me personally, I sometimes just have like difficulty comprehending, or not comprehending, but just analyzing and processing text, especially maybe through my laptop if it's like a homework. I know I'm thinking a lot about the academic application to problems like this, but one thing that I will say is that like, I mean, sometimes people will be like, if you can't process this as well as a lot of like other kids on this campus, then it's either that you shouldn't be here because you don't have that academic like talent, or they just don't think that we don't have the drive or can't get as far as other kids who are processing that the same material quicker. And so I feel like that shouldn't be the perception, because
Yeah.
in my experience, I have a lot more drive and I have a lot more passion to learning about the some of these topics. Like I like math, for example, than a lot of neurotypical kids, because a lot of neurotypical kids do not like math and such. And so just like I saw you raise your
That's
hand.
not even a thing indicative, like being
Right.
neurodivergent, neurotypical. It's just your own passion, but the way that you apply yourself to it is going to be different because you understand that
Exactly.
the difficulty does not impact the potential you have, and is not representative of the potential you have, but rather just an obstacle at times.
Exactly. And so I feel like there should be more care when discussing issues like surrounding somebody's processing or ethic when it comes to like that.
And I think like another big
Yeah.
thing about that is like everyone processes something differently, and you
Right.
shouldn't be singled out just because you do it even more differently. I know like you talk about like your favorite subjects in math, like, you know, there's different ways to solve a question, and just like that, there's different ways that you can become your own person and do what you want to do. And I feel like your ideas and examples reflect that.
Right. Thank you.
Let's see. So we talked a lot about PA, but now on to like as a whole. So, October is ADHD Awareness Month, and that is, yeah, yay. And that is where we overall wanted to really talk about in society as a whole. What can we do to be more inclusive, and what are situations that you've been put into in the past, maybe not academic, just in like your life, that you might think that is unjust, unfair, is unreasonable, and what is something that we can do to prevent that?
Oh, this is a loaded question, and my brain is still trying to transition from like PA to society as a whole. I guess a lot of it is generally ableism. And I think a lot of it does have to do with education, because the first thing that my mind went to is actually like gifted systems in schools. They have a huge impact on how people perceive, or like not even gifted education, but like special education and gifted education programs being like the same side of the like different sides of the same coin in a sense, because people sort of tend to judge like whether or not you are like worthy of, I guess, doing a lot of different things, or like just like your potential is based off of like your ability to do well in school sometimes, and a little bit more than that. But it's also gifted education and special education programs can often give the impression that some students are it portrays a lot of biases that causes neurodivergence to be misrepresented in general life. And I feel like it's sort of mixed between like the decades and everything. So I feel like that's one of the sources that we can be changing the way that we perceive America, because just the system like ranking kids based off of like their ability, their speed to turn in assignments, to do work, to do this, to do that, and the fourth. It doesn't really reflect like what the kids have to go through in order to achieve a certain level of to achieve a certain level of success, nor does it reflect how they actually like what their actual potential as people in society is, whether they contribute or not, because nobody actually has to contribute to society. But like just like our ability to be people shouldn't be determined by our ability to learn.
There's also a question of what values society has when regarding how they categorize a person. Very often, this has to do with an ability to communicate. A lot of brilliant people are non-speaking, and for that reason alone are immediately put into like special ed programs, and their intellect is completely disregarded just because they're not capable of like communicating on the same method as is expected of a general society.
We're good.
A lot of expectations are based on a neurotypical standard, and people have a hard time like bending their minds to understand that there are people who function in different ways and are just not valuing the same aspects as a general society.
Yeah, it can be tough because a lot of neurotypical or neurodivergent sort of characteristics are rooted within like education. It can be sometimes really difficult to
Specifically with ADHD.
Yeah, specifically with ADHD. But I mean, other times there are a lot of other applications when it comes to like sports and careers, because you have to learn at pretty much every stage in your life, and like whether you can apply that to something that you love, whether you can apply that to something that you do for money or something like that, whether you apply that to your philosophy or your arts, it really like portrays different stories for when that art comes to neurotypical people. And so I think that just one thing to really do is also just to keep an open mind when somebody shares their art, shares their ability to perform, and shares their ability to like communicate. We just really have to like come at people with a non-judgmental standard
Mindset.
or like a mindset. Exactly. We really have to like standardize different mindsets when it comes to
Or
how
remove the standard.
Exactly. Just there, because it influences just a lot of our lives. So, yeah.
You guys are upperclassmen, I think, and so
Right.
building off of that, like, do you think you guys have per se, I wouldn't say like a mentor, but like someone or like some idea in your life that like throughout your experience being not neurotypical, that are there people in your lives who you think support you and push you beyond? So once you get past high school, which is a where you are like in these like gifted programs or like not gifted programs,
Yeah.
or like you're so divided, do you think that it's gonna like get better in like the real world, like once you have a job and maybe you're like on your own? Or do you think that it's still gonna be the same? Or do you guys have any idea of what it's gonna be like? Like, have you ever seen someone do it? Or
I mean, this is part of why we created PANDA. PANDA is I don't want to say like a beacon, but like we're a center for people to recognize that like you are not the only neurodivergent person at PA. Yeah, you can. We want to be those first mentors for people. I never really had anyone in my life who was like, I understand like my life through the lens of this person. Like no one's going to have the same neurodivergent experience that you do, because that is the nature of neurodiversity. Every person has their own experience. But I mean, I want to create the support that I never had.
Right.
For so long, I was ignored and such when I was raising concerns. And I think now that I have the information that I have about the way my brain works, I can use that in my life beyond Andover to share with other people. That's really what I'm passionate about. It's like helping people realize that they are not strange or alone in their neurodiversity. And I think to me, it's more important to be the mentor than it is to have the mentor, because I've spent so long doing that already.
Yeah. I'll say for myself, I mean, self-diagnosis is like a different topic for another day. But I've identified the signs of ADHD in myself since I was like 9 or 10. And now that I'm here, I'm actually receiving like treatment, or not treatment, but like medication, care programs for that. But like through all that, and even now in a lot of senses, and even when interacting with people who I think were neurodivergent in retrospect, I can only really say that my own true mentor was myself when I was thinking about like my interaction with the world, my ability to do what I want, and like what expectations I should be setting for myself. Thinking about a lot of these different factors, it was like I really had myself to think about it with, because a lot of the mentors, they are taking care of the concerns that other people say. And so like if it's like, oh yeah, you're doing well in school, then of course that's not going to be a flag for anybody else, and that's not going to be taken into consideration the same way. Whereas like bad behavior, blurting out things randomly, or speaking up or standing up or doing whatever in the classroom is going to be a different concern. I will say that like I'm kind of forgetting the question.
I think this is a question that's going to be answered very differently depending on who you ask. I think in particular for Jaylen and I, a lot of our experience has been based around being undiagnosed. And so for a diagnosed, or like I'm diagnosed now, but for people who had those different life experiences growing up with their diagnosis versus like taking care of themselves, that's going to be completely different.
Right. So that's just overall it really, I think that the mentorship aspect of it, like all I really wanted to say is like the mentorship aspect of it also has a lot to do with how people communicate and talk about ADHD regarding neurotypical standards and like set points. Like that's like, if you're not performing well in like one area and you're performing as a neurotypical would in another, then they'll care about that one area and they won't worry about like, okay, how are you actually like getting this done? They won't see that. But at the same time, it's a little bit hard to build that sympathy. It's a little bit difficult to build that like standard of just like a non-judgmental environment in some situations. So I mean, yeah, I guess it's a little bit hard to gauge what it will be beyond here.
The future holds what it holds, and you just have to adapt to it.
Right. So it's just, yeah, it's really us. We have ourselves. And so I think that PANDA is a really interesting and good and exciting initiative when it comes to sort of restructuring what neurodivergent unity and support looks like.
Sense. And then I think before, I don't know if you guys came in here wanting to say anything, but I just think that it'd be helpful to the listeners of before you were medically diagnosed, when you would both self-diagnosed yourselves, what is something that you maybe wish that you did in order to help yourself, maybe? Like, what is something that you think that maybe if I had like pursued this idea about myself more, I would have a passion in something else?
I mean, for me, a lot of it is shame. Not necessarily in being neurodivergent, but in struggling with it. I felt like if I couldn't be... A lot of the reason I went so long undiagnosed was every time I raised concerns, they were dismissed. And I felt like I wasn't neurodivergent enough at times. If it wasn't bad enough that I was, that for people to actually listen to me, then why was it bad enough for me to still be struggling?
Yeah.
And like holding myself to a neurotypical standard because I couldn't get my diagnosis, but functioning on a neurodivergent standard, and it just didn't line up. And I think I should have been kinder to myself, because so much of my exhaustion and the burnout I experienced was from continuing to hold myself to that nerd standard. That was just unfair.
And I think in retrospect, it's kind of hard for me to say that I would have done anything differently because, I've always sort of like held myself to my own standard, which is just like the best that I've possibly wanted to do and like the best that I could have done for myself. It's a little bit hard. I mean, sort of connecting this back to your mentorship question, because like a lot of the support programs would be about performing for us to perform on the same level as our peers, which is like really difficult. And so I feel like it's like at least I mean, yeah, since I've gotten to Andover, not even since I've gotten to Andover, a little bit before Andover, I have had like a better time in school holding myself to my own standard and like doing as well as I wanted to do. But yeah, honestly, I can't say so much because I haven't thought about it's a hard question to think about for me.
I mean, both of us got diagnosed or are in the process since coming to Andover.
I'm actually not fully diagnosed yet. I do have, and my ADHD has been recognized by psychs and everything, but I'm getting my official evaluation on the 23rd of this month. So we actually did an evaluation party last year for you, right?
Yeah, when I got my evaluation, we had a party because I got my autism diagnosis. We're actually not sure if I have ADHD or not still. But like so much of like the standards I held myself to were on the basis of performance rather than of happiness, which I think really should be valued so much more, especially when talking about neurodivergent people, because no one's duty is to perform. It is to, their duty to themselves is to be happy.
Yeah, I think to that question, I wish that I sort of would have allowed myself to like be okay doing what I wanted to do in the way that I wanted, because I feel like we have, say, like ADHD and autism. Well, we share hyperfixations, for example. I think autism also has like special interests, which are different in the sense that I think. Can you explain the difference?
So special interests are like more all-encompassing. They are much more long-term. I recently saw special interest defined as something that brings you autistic joy in any capacity that it appears. Hyperfixations tend to be more short-term, very often up to a year long. They're very intense in that short period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that's actually, so I've had my fair share of hyperfixations ever since, like, as early as I can remember. And one thing that I can say in terms of my experience that I just thought was, especially closer to the time that I applied to Andover, there's a little bit of shame when it comes to productivity. There's a little bit of shame about like not performing in hyperfixations that are productive.
I've never had a productive hyperfixation in my life.
Yeah, so it's just like because I mean,
it's
right
like,
now,
why can I focus on this random topic that matters to no one, but I can't focus on my work?
Exactly, yeah. So like for me, it's been mathematics, but it's also just hard for me to learn. So engaging with that has been a little bit difficult, and I sometimes do feel behind my peers. But I also know that this is just me now, and I'm just like working as hard as I want to, and working as hard as what makes me happy. And I also do have to balance that with a life here. But you know, before it would be things like high pitched voices and like the top 10, a lot of statistical hyperfixations, I'm not gonna lie, but like top 10 fastest Olympic runners, or like high jump was a weird one for me, but not a weird one, but that was just one. I think it was really fun. I actually tried out for track and I got tendonitis from it. Yeah, and that was like my second time. I'm a dancer, so I've had it maybe 4. In the same knee, maybe, but yeah, there's a lot of shame when it comes to very particular aspects of our like condition as well. So it can be a little bit difficult to.
I mean, I joke that no one's ever going to take me seriously because of my special interests. They're just really like things that people won't take seriously, and yet they like are so all-encompassing for me.
Yeah, it's just I guess it also has to do with like, in that sense, it also has to do with neurotypical perception. Mm-hmm. And so like, because it's like, whether it's productivity or whether it's just considered weird or not, just straight up, we aren't really often, allowed to have these things if we think that it's not doing something for the world.
Yeah, and it's also hard to find like things like neurodivergent joy when the entire expectation of neurodivergent people is to be miserable all the time.
Yeah.
Like you're like, you have a condition, you have to be upset about it. Like, no,
Right.
like I'm autistic and I'm really happy about it. It makes my life like impossible sometimes, but I'm happy to be autistic.
Yeah, and I'd say that like being ADHD is a part of me, whether it makes me happy or not. Like I, it's a big part of how I function. It's a big part of who I am as a person, just Jaylen Daley. So I mean, I think that it makes me happy in my own ways too, just because it's just like I'm bold, I'm loud, I'm excited about things, but it's like that's one aspect of shame that I think that is also really important to acknowledge and just appreciate.
Be proud of who you are. Not try to change yourself to what the world wants you to be, what you want to be.
Neurodiversity is not a curse. It's just an identity.
Yeah, it's just who we are.
I don't know, you guys want to add anything? Cayman want to say anything to all kinds of listeners out there?
One thing about me is I'm bad at after conversations. If there are any comments, I usually build off of those.
All right, well, I guess that is all for today. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Love you, Phillipian.
Thank you.